What's going on, guys? This is Empty Box, and this is Assetto Corsa, where today we're going to be talking about Assetto Corsa because it is now officially released, no longer in early access. This is the initial release for Assetto Corsa, the version 1.0, and it's said that Assetto Corsa will be an ongoing developing project, which means that things will be expanded upon in the future. However, I will also say this, and no, this does not just apply to Kunos. Talk is cheap. It's easy to tell me that you're going to improve the game in the future, but you actually have to do that. And I can't sit here and say, oh, well, they'll eventually do that, with concrete knowledge that they will actually do that. While they did a very good job throughout the early access campaign of keeping the game updated and fixing things as bugs popped up, I can only take the game for what it is right now, not what they're going to do 3 years down the road. Because again, 3 years down the road, other games could very well be doing things entirely different, and we wouldn't even be having this conversation. So this is really just a snapshot as it is right here, right now, at this current time. So how does Assetto Corsa stack up? Well, let's go ahead and talk about the physics and force feedback side of things, because as a racing simulator, that is what is most important. And there's been lots of arguments over the last year regarding Assetto Corsa's physics. There's a lot of people that are absolutely head over heels with it. There are a lot of people that are very unhappy with it, and they bust out the S word, which we're not going to use because we are civilized people around here. So, well, I'll put it this way. Compared to the early access versions of Assetto Corsa, they have taken a step forward in the release versions. The cars have, strangely, I'm putting air quotes around that, gotten slower, which is something that's really needed to happen, as people were driving cars ridiculously fast. Scratch my head on that one, not really. But there's notably less grip available in the release version than there was in the early access versions, which is something that needed to happen and should have happened. Accordingly, I've seen a lot of complaints on the forums about people not having enough grip, but hey, welcome to reality. You actually have a normal level of grip. You can no longer just go ahead and drive the car like an absolute madman because you have crazy amounts of grip. There is a lot more sensitivity involved in driving in Assetto Corsa now. As far as I'm concerned, the physics from the release candidate version to the actual release version took about 3 steps forward. It is the best now that it's ever been. Everything has improved. The cars are sharper, while at the same time they're more forgiving, but they're more difficult in the right ways. No, I don't think the physics are impressive as, for example, R-Factor 2. However, Assetto Corsa has provided a very good base to mod with, which is one of the strong points of Assetto Corsa, and that we've already seen throughout the early access. So even if they're not necessarily the most impressive physics I've ever seen, at the same time they're good enough and they provide a good base, which means that they're doing what needs to be done, essentially, for Assetto Corsa to be popular with me long term. So that's a good thing. For example, if you're looking for a car in Assetto Corsa to enjoy, one car that I recommend highly, Ferrari 458 Stage 3, the 458 Challenge car, essentially. That thing, that is a car. Okay, that thing is a blast to drive. Highly recommend it, so give it a go. Along the same lines, force feedback. This is a massive step forward for this version as far as I'm concerned. Again, while the force feedback is not necessarily the best feeling to my hands personally, I do feel like the force feedback has taken a notable step forward and it has improved. They've implemented a minimum force feedback slider in the options menu, which is basically telling the game that there is this much mechanical resistance in your wheel, more or less. So here's what the actual minimum force that the wheel will actually output that you can actually feel. That this changes everything. This makes everything feel better. There is no downsides to this setting at all. This should have been in there from the start. Really. Force feedback is so much better than what it was previously. I actually feel like now I can see why people were saying, this is the best force feedback ever. While I don't necessarily agree with it, the force feedback is actually what I would consider passable now, which is a big step forward from being one of the weakest areas within Assetto Corsa. But chances are you don't want to just drive around by yourself. You actually want to race with people, hence racing sim. So, anyways, First of all, there is no flag system, no black flags, no yellow flags, no blue flags. This is something that is intended to be added into Assetto Corsa in a future update, but again, we can only talk about the game as it is right now. Because of this, that means that there is no jump start penalties, because, well, there's no way to enforce a penalty. That means that everybody has to sit there on the starting line in neutral, so you can't actually physically jump the start, which really removes one of the most intense aspects of a standing start. There is no rolling starts in Assetto Corsa. There is a penalty system that is so bad, pretty much everybody turns it off. This penalty system is straight out of the Gran Turismo playbook. As soon as you go far enough off track, you'll be forced to slow down to 30 miles an hour or remove your throttle for 5 seconds, basically. You'll have to coast for 5 seconds once you get back on track. Now, that sounds like, oh, well, that's not that bad. That's a good way to keep people from cutting the track and things like that. Yes, it's a good intention system. However, what usually happens is you're going sideways off the track because you got your braking wrong, and next thing you know, the game says, yeah, you don't get to use your right foot to help you control the car and keep yourself from wrecking. Usually when you trigger one of these systems, trigger the penalty system, it's because you're probably about to wreck, more or less. And the penalty system does not help you prevent yourself from wrecking in a very ridiculous fashion, very unsim-like. Honestly, this is terrible. It's been complained about many a time throughout the early access portion of this game's development, and it basically remained there throughout the whole thing. It is toggleable. I would strongly suggest you turn it off because it is silly. It's just terrible. There is also a visual and physical damage model within Assetto Corsa, and I run with that turned off. In fairness, in its defense, we were not expecting this to be within the initial release of Assetto Corsa, but alas, it is here, so we can only talk about it as it is right now. It needs work. It needs a lot of work, even still in this, air quotes, released game. The visual and the physical don't match up at all. For example, you can be bumped from behind by a car doing 3, 4, 5 miles an hour more than you. Just a simple bump draft, more or less, that you see all the time, and your front windshield will explode, basically, and you'll have cracks running all over the place, and you're just like, what the heck? How is this still happening? It's just ridiculous. First of all, windshields don't break like that in a race car, because they're not glass. Second of all, nobody's windshield, no matter what it's made out of, is breaking at 3-mile-an-hour impacts from behind. Just makes no sense. There's also the case of, you know, again, the visual not matching the physical. It's very possible for your car's front end to look like it's entirely deranged and about falling off, you know, like it's held on by one last screw and hanging on for dear life, but it's not actually affecting anything. It's more or less entirely fine because it really was just a minor impact. So it needs a lot of tweaking. There's also the fact that the damage doesn't match up with the car's construction, which I think is kind of expecting a little bit too much. Cars with carbon fiber bodywork, the bodywork doesn't disintegrate into shards. Fiberglass cars don't, you know, rip in the way that fiberglass does. You know, they all just kind of dent up like they're made out of steel or aluminum, which, you know, again, I think that's kind of expecting a little bit too much. The damage itself doesn't look bad. You know, looks comparable to other games out there from a visual standpoint, but again, the visual not matching up with the physical, the odd sensitivity issues that it has, it's just not ready for usage right now, is the way I look at it. There is also a track grip implementation, which basically allows you to control how much grip that the track has. For example, is the track in a dusty state? Is it in a green state? Is it in a highly rubbered up optimum state? Basically how much grip the track itself actually has, which is independent of what the car actually has. This is a pretty cool little thing to have, and definitely adds some life to things. I would strongly suggest not running on optimum all the time because it'll be incredibly boring for you because everything has super mega grip with optimum track conditions, but you know, it's nice to see this, and this will progress as the session goes on. For example, a dusty track will clean up a little bit and you'll have more grip the more laps you do on it. However, it's not implemented in a state that it's as good as R Factor 2's Real Road, where it's actually fully dynamic, and where you drive is where the track represents. I would like to see that. That is a way that I feel that Kunos could improve what they already have. What they have gets the job done. It's basic. It does what it's designed to do. But at the same time, I do feel like it could do a little bit more that will make it a more impressive feature. Offline, there are no pit stops. With the release version, this is a change from the release candidate, actually. You can now actually turn the fuel consumption off, which will enable you to do a 60-lap race against the AI. If you run with fuel consumption turned on, you will be limited to a 10-lap race. The AI currently doesn't know how to pit, which is why there's a restriction on how long the race can actually be. Which, it's at least nice that they enabled longer races when you turn the fuel consumption off, because I do think that has been a major sticking point for a lot of people who wanted longer races. Yes, it does kind of suck that you have to turn fuel consumption off, but in fairness, if the race was going to be long enough, but not long enough that you were having a long race, but not long enough that you needed a pit stop, fuel consumption doesn't really matter all that much for an offline race. There are pit stops online, however. So speaking about AI and online racing, how does it work? Well, offline racing, the AI is terrible. It is terrible. It needs a lot of work even still. It has definitely improved from when they first released AI. It has definitely improved since the previous release candidate. However, it is still the worst out there on the market right now versus its competition. It's not even close. In my opinion, the AI is not even competitive with the likes of R Factor 2, Game Stock Car, Race Room Racing Experience. It just doesn't even come close to those titles and many more. I mean, the AI in this game is not even as good as many games that are 15, 20 years old, which, yeah, it just isn't a very fun experience to race offline. The AI brakes way too early. They get to a speed that's really slow, and then they'll speed up, and then they'll brake again, and then they'll turn in. And then you'll also get into these weird races where you'll have basically probably like 7/10 of the field that's all packed up and racing, sort of in a way that you would expect. The cars aren't strung out massively. They're kind of about right. But then the other cars are doing lap times that are like 1.5 seconds a lap faster than everybody else in the field. And you're like, what's going on here? Why are those two cars specifically so much faster? Yeah. And because the AI is so bleh, that means that the career mode is also pretty much useless. A lot of people have said that the career mode is basically junk. It doesn't really serve any purpose. It's more so just there to provide you a reason, air quotes, to race. And you just go through these basic series of events. There's nothing fancy or anything to it. It's very standard, very straightforward. However, and a lot of people haven't really caught on to this, I think. I think they're just kind of caught in, bashing on the career mode and how pointless it really actually is, because it is pointless. But this basically serves as a championship mode, which will enable people to create custom seasons and everything, for example, with their own track rotations and everything like that, which is stuff that we've already seen in the early access. And I think that's really going to be the strong point of the career mode, is enabling people to create custom seasons, more or less, that you'd see in many other games. So while the career mode itself doesn't offer anything exciting in terms of a reason to play through the career, it does offer a needed feature in terms of having an ability to create custom seasons and custom track rotations and things like that, which is a great thing to have, because some other games don't have those particular features. And that's a good thing that Assetto Corsa actually has that feature over its competition. So how about multiplayer? How well does that work out within Assetto Corsa? Pleasantly enough, in my opinion, I find that it's one of the better areas of this title. I've been experiencing a little bit of higher pings that I would like, and that's largely because I'm typically connecting to Europe, because about 95% of the servers seem to be located in Europe, and I'm connecting from the United States. So, well, there's that whole geographical issue involved. Not necessarily the game's fault, although I will say that the pings are a little bit higher than what I receive in other games connecting to the same regions of the world. but I can't necessarily blame that on the game entirely. However, the game does handle such a connection just fine. I haven't really had too much of an issue. The game's run well, it's run smoothly, and enables a good solid racing experience. I have noticed a little bit more warping than I'd like to see from other players, but I'm not sure if that's more so those players having a terrible connection in the first place rather than the game not coping with a higher ping player of about 250, 300 and above. So, you know, it's kind of hard to blame the game when somebody has a connection with that high of a ping, but unfortunately, it's something that you're going to have to deal with sooner rather than later. And then there's also the issue of, well, the quality of racing. Yeah, public server racing is always going to be public server racing. It can be good, it can be bad, and that's just the way it is, and you're going to have to deal with it. Yeah. This is not iRacing, don't expect it, okay? And then there is also the fact that as a moddable sim, it's going to have to deal with the issues of a moddable sim, which is eventually there's going to end up being a lot of content out there, which means that there's going to be a lot of different versions of the same track, and servers will be running different versions of the same track, and it very easily can end up spinning out of control and becoming way too many folders, way too many files that are the same, but they're not the same, so... That's something that happened to R-Factor 1, which was another moddable platform for sim racing, which I definitely foresee happening to Assetto Corsa, unfortunately. But, you know, again, if you want to fix those two issues, join a league, and you'll get better quality racing, as well as you won't have to worry about content mismatches, because you should hopefully know what tracks your league is racing at. And honestly, it might sound like I'm being a little bit negative about the multiplayer, but I do think it works quite well. But again, you do have to tone your expectations to the public racing environment. That does beg to ask the question, though, is Assetto Corsa ready for league usage? Personally, I don't necessarily know. I don't see why you couldn't, but at the same time, I don't know why you would choose Assetto Corsa over whatever platform your league is currently with. Because there are definitely some rough areas within the racing that I've already talked about in this video. So yeah, it's more so a question of what are you willing to put up with, not so much a question of is the game mechanically sound enough to support league racing. So that's that, in my opinion at least. Alright, I think that just about covers it from that standpoint. On to shiny things and things that make loud noises and stuff, because that's what everybody likes, right? And obviously throughout the course of the video you've been looking at the graphics, so I don't need to say too terribly much more about that. Just keep in mind that this is a YouTube video, and therefore it automatically looks crappier than what it actually does. And I think hopefully everybody understands that now, and understands what the concept of compression means. What is more impressive though is the fact that this game actually runs well. In fact, it runs very well. I'm running a fairly old system by modern standards. It's an i5 2500K with a NVIDIA GTX 670. Not high-end stuff, not the most greatest stuff ever. And even when it was brand new, it still wasn't the best ever. And yet this game still runs fantastically. I'm running with everything turned up with medium reflections, which honestly you would never even tell the difference if you were doing anything other than taking screenshots. But I'm getting about 70 frames per second at the start of the race with a field of about 20 AI, going all the way up to about 90 frames per second, which I actually have it capped at probably about a lap in. It's very surprising how well this game actually runs, and I have to say they did a very good job with that. Another thing that's really cool, they've also included post-processing filters, which are basically a way to control how the game looks and the way that the lighting is presented to you and everything like that. For example, using these files, you can actually go ahead and create your own custom filters, which can make the game black and white. Hey, who doesn't want to do Charlie Chaplin GT3 races? You know, or you can make the colors all like crazy and things like that, or you can make your game look even better. Yeah. So I have to say, the graphics engine of this game is fairly outstanding in that regard. But I think a lot of people probably already knew that. Okay, we go from one of the areas that everybody's going crazy about within the Assetto Corsa, the graphics, everybody likes shiny things, right? To one of the areas that has been the perennial worst part of Assetto Corsa, the sounds. While the sounds have certainly improved even from the release candidate version of Assetto Corsa, it's still lackluster. This is not one of the best areas of Assetto Corsa, however I feel like it has improved enough that I wouldn't say it's the worst part of Assetto Corsa. I would say the AI is. But, you know, these are not sounds that are as bad as Gran Turismo, for example, where everybody knows about the horrible vacuum noises that their cars make, but they're not necessarily the most impressive sounds ever. This is not race room racing experience, but it's not bad. Some cars do sound fairly good, some cars do sound fairly bad. It is a little bit hit and miss in that standpoint. I do think it could have benefited from a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra polish, which kind of leaves me to my closing thought. So wrapping things up, Assetto Corsa is a game that has a lot of promise, is a very good initial platform, but needs a lot of the things that make a racing sim to be a fully functional, competitive, capable title that stands alone by itself. Doesn't race as well offline as Game Stock Car or some of the other titles. It doesn't race as well online as iRacing, for example. Doesn't have the racing environment of rFactor 2. Doesn't have the racing physics of rFactor 2. Doesn't have the sounds of race room racing experience. Doesn't have the graphics of Project Cars. Although I personally think they're better here in Assetto Corsa, but that's a different story for a different time. You know, it's a question of what is going to fit for what you're looking for. And I think a lot of people are looking at Assetto Corsa as this game that's just going to basically wipe everybody else off the map, or they had been looking at Assetto Corsa as this game that's going to wipe everybody off the map. But it turns out that Assetto Corsa is honestly just the same as rFactor 2, a game that needs a whole heck of a lot of development to truly realize its full potential. Will it actually get that development, and how soon will it get that development is the question. But until then, we have what we have, so we might as well enjoy it. So I'm going to go act like a hooligan in an E30 M3 because I can. So hope you guys enjoyed. Bye.